Welcome to this explainer. We're going to uncover a piece of history today that is absolutely fascinating and honestly kind of misunderstood. We're looking at how the destruction of the mighty Roman Republic wasn't just some sudden murder in the Senate House. Nope, it was a devastating, century-long systemic collapse.
So, let's dive right in. We almost always picture Rome's fall as this single, super violent event, right? The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of March. But really, how does a 400-year-old superpower slowly tear itself apart from the inside out? Well, it doesn't just happen overnight. It happens when the very traditions meant to hold the society together are slowly, quietly corrupted.
Section 1. The root cause. Rise of client armies. To really get this, we have to look at a subtle, almost invisible shift in loyalty. It all started with these military reforms that accidentally pitted the armies of Rome against the state itself. Just take a look at this timeline we've got here. It illustrates a chilling, century-long domino effect, starting way back in 107 BC with a commander named Marius and culminating in 44 BC with Caesar's death. You can see how each desperate power grab literally sets the stage for the next one, ultimately leading to total institutional collapse. Let's look at exactly how that very first domino fell.
Okay, so our whole story hinges entirely on the perversion of the patron-client system. Traditionally, this was just a way for Roman leaders to support their community. But then, new men, basically leaders who weren't born into the absolute highest nobility, guys like the famous commander Gaius Marius, well, they totally changed the game. Back in 107 BC, Marius desperately needed troops, so he just removed the property requirements to join the army. He recruited impoverished citizens, the proletarians, and paid them with war booty. Suddenly, these soldiers were loyal only to him, their generous patron, and not to the Senate or the Republic. Imagine if a modern country's military wasn't paid by the government, but directly out of the pocket of a rogue billionaire general. That is exactly what happened here. And when you picture these soldiers, you have to realize the harsh reality of their lives. As you can imagine, they carried incredibly heavy gear, trained intensely, and risked their lives every single day. But the Roman state, it offered them absolutely no regular compensation, no pensions, nothing. So put yourself in their shoes. These men had to look entirely to their victorious generals for their livelihood, for share of the plunder, and honestly, for their very survival.
Section 2. The First Breach. Sulla marches on Rome.
Now, this created a deeply toxic new military dynamic, and it reached its terrifying first climax in 88 BC when a ruthless noble named Sulla did the unthinkable, proving just how incredibly dangerous these new client armies could be. So Sulla was super jealous that a military command in Asia Minor was being transferred away from him and given to his rival, Marius. But instead of just accepting the legal transfer, Sulla set a catastrophic precedent. He actually marched his own Roman client army into the capital city of Rome itself. His officers deserted him in absolute horror, but his ordinary soldiers, they obeyed him completely. Sulla chose his personal prestige and the promise of plunder over the safety of the Republic.
And once Sulla proved that violence could trump the law, the old checks and balances were severely damaged. Ambitious new leaders saw this, and you better believe they took notes. Take Pompey the Great, for example. He completely bypassed the traditional ladder of offices. He gathered a private army when he was just 23 years old and relied on brute force to demand glory. He famously told Sulla, "More people worship the rising than the setting sun."
Section 3. The Power Players. The First Triumvirate.
So, with the system deeply fractured and the rule of law totally giving way to the rule of the sword, three incredibly powerful men decided to just bypass the Senate entirely and carve up the Republic for themselves. In 60 BC, Pompey, the fabulously wealthy Crassus, and the intensely ambitious Julius Caesar formed the First Triumvirate. This was an informal, highly illegal backroom deal designed solely so each man could achieve his own massive personal ambitions. As we can see, Pompey got land for his veterans, Crassus got financial breaks for his tax collector clients, and Caesar got the consulship and a command in Gaul. And he definitely used that command to wipe out his enormous debts through massive plunder.
But as you might guess, an alliance built purely on selfish ambition was basically doomed to fail. Crassus ended up dying in battle, and the marital alliance between Pompey and Caesar totally ruptured. By 53 BC, the triumvirate had completely collapsed, and political gang violence escalated in the capital to the point where Rome literally couldn't function. The streets were so dangerous that it was actually impossible to even hold elections for consuls. The Republic was completely paralyzed.
Section 4. The Final Collapse. Caesar crosses the Rubicon.
This total breakdown of civic order set the perfect stage for the ultimate showdown between the last two men standing, Pompey, who was now backed by the Senate, and Julius Caesar, fresh from conquering Gaul. The Senate ordered Caesar to surrender his command, but instead, Caesar echoed Sulla's earlier treason. In 49 BC, he marched his fiercely loyal client army toward Rome, uttering those famous words, "Let's roll the dice," as he crossed the Rubicon River. And just like that, this single action plunged the Roman world into a devastating civil war.
Caesar eventually defeats Pompey and his supporters. But then he faced this huge dilemma. How do you actually govern a politically fractured Rome? Well, his brilliant solution was to just dismantle the Republic's traditions entirely. He declared himself dictator always. He expanded the Senate with his own supporters and essentially ruled as a disguised king. But he completely underestimated the entrenched traditional upper-class hatred for kings. Remember, the old Roman proverb was literally that a king is a beast that feeds on human flesh. So, needless to say, Caesar's solution to fix Rome spectacularly backfired.
Just look at the details on this coin minted by the conspirators. On one side you have Brutus, and on the other, the symbols of the liberators, 2 daggers and a freedom cap, right along with the date, the Ides of March. They used those daggers to murder Caesar in 44 BC, foolishly believing that mere violence would magically restore traditional liberty. They really thought the old system would just automatically snap back into place.
Section 5. The cultural toll. A century of trauma.
But here's the thing. Killing Caesar definitely didn't save the Republic. It only sparked even more ferocious civil wars. And this century of relentless bloodshed happened because the Republic's core values were completely inverted. The ancient tradition, the way of the elders, was all about putting country and family first, really serving the communal well-being. But the new reality, forged by men like Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar, it replaced that with a relentless, violent pursuit of individual glory, immense wealth, and supreme power, absolutely no matter the cost to the state.
And this profound sense of instability really bled into everyday Roman life, their art, their literature. Just listen to this quote from the contemporary poet Catullus. He urged people to live for the moment and basically ignore conventional standards, writing, "Suns can set and rise again. We, when once our brief light has set, must sleep one never-ending night." Ordinary life just felt completely precarious. The trauma of watching their republic commit slow-motion suicide changed the Roman psyche forever. So, as we look back at the slow-motion collapse of the Roman Republic, we are left with a pretty haunting question. If a civilization's survival truly depends on shared values and mutual obligations, what happens when leaders prioritize their own glory over the system itself? It's a really powerful reminder that systems don't just break from outside forces, they crumble when the people inside them stop believing in the rules. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a whole new perspective on how history actually unfolds.